Welcome back then folks to, of course, the second build of this particular day of Special Projects Pack number 5. This is, the 6th build so far, I believe. Now for, of course, a very nostalgic car. A car which I'm basing the current build on a previous version of this machine, which is technically a real car, but we also, of course, had a version of it in Gran Turismo's past. The Corvette Z06 Race Car, as they call it, an SCCA category machine, or falling under those regulations. Of course, there are a couple of different players who have done liveries for it. This is the particular one that I'm using. There is a version of it which a different player did that's a little bit more of a greyish silver, which is technically more accurate. I chose this one, though, which has a bit more of a bluish tinge, because it suits the chunkiness of the car. I prefer the wheels that they used, and some of the decals look a bit more accurate. So you've got options there, and you could certainly search it up if you don't want to use this one. As far as the parts, of course, we'll jump over into the tuning shop, or the upgrade shop, more specifically, to show you what we're doing there. This one, along with the Sierra from earlier on today, the Group A car, are definitely the two out of the pack which require the most fettling. This one by far is, I will say, the most challenging out of the 10 cars. You've really got to learn how to use this thing, because unlike in the older games where it was, as I recall, quite an OP car, it's pretty easy to drive and tremendously fast, one of the quickest classics in the game and a very underrated one for the most part. Now, it actually feels a lot more accurate, because for a start, it's not a race car, it's a road car that we've turned into one, so of course it's not going to feel as OP, but at the end of the day, it's an 1168 kilo, 609 horsepower C2 Corvette, so it's going to be leery. And if those numbers seem familiar, I am of course using the Gran Turismo 6 numbers as a reference. So as far as the tuning, you want your Stage 1 weight reduction. For the Club Sports, the high lift cams, I've gone for, of course, Stage 2 weight as well. Power restrictor and ballast are always a good thing to have, and pretty cheap as well. The fully customised computer, the racing crank, I've gone for the low-end supercharger, the fully customised diff. Then as far as racing stuff, the silencer, the filter, the manifold, the pads, and the discs. Like I've said before, really doesn't matter what discs you go for. As far as the transmission and suspension, they're both racing, of course. The clutch and flywheel as well. Racing hard tyres, as I often go for. You could, I guess, downgrade that if you want to get it, I don't know, maybe closer to 600 perhaps, because it's already below 700. For the extreme section, nothing fitted there. And for the ultimate section, likewise. You could go for the carbon prop shaft. It was a more recent addition since I built this one, so I'll leave that down to you. It's not like it's going to make a massive difference anyway. And as far as the garage, of course, we will jump back in for the actual setup. Now, like I said, this car definitely demands respect. You'll see when we take it out on a track in a second, it can definitely break its wheels loose very, very easily, which is not too surprising. It's kind of appropriate for the car anyway. So, as far as the tyres, of course, they are fitted, the racing hards. For the suspension, I've gone for 105mm, so not quite bottoming out, but pretty low. It still looks quite high because of the ground clearance, though. We've got 5 on anti-roll, 35 for the compression on the dampers, with 40 for rebound, 3.05 for the springs, so very, very high on that one. 3 degrees of camber, and then a heck of a lot of tow. And this was to try and bring the car under a lot more control, so we've got tow in 30 on the front, or on the back I should say, and tow out 30 on the front. Then for the diff, again, quite aggressively different numbers, the lowest initial torque and acceleration, and 40 for braking. If you already have a setup that you like on this car, as far as the diff or the suspension, you could always do a Frankenstein between what I've done and what you prefer, or even go for what you like. You know, it's all down to personal preference. As far as the transmission, I've gone for 320 on the auto setting, because yes, it is tremendously powerful, but it's not really a top-end car. I mean, it was very quick in the older games, but that was more so when you tuned it even further, whereas this one, you know, up around like 200 miles an hour is more than enough, really, most of the time. As far as the ballast, you want 23 kilos to bring us up to that weight that it used to have of 1168. I've put that all the way to the back, which brings us very nicely close to a 60-40 split, which is still very much tail happy, but there you go. We've got the ECU set on 97%, again to get us closer to that Gran Turismo 6 number. No downforce on this one, which doesn't exactly help. I believe the older car did have downforce in the older game, so that is a difference immediately. And as far as this stuff, of course, you already know what we fitted, because you could see it. So, naturally, we'll jump out to a track, also a throwback track no less, to show you what it can do in practice. Like I said, this is, don't get it twisted, unlike this car's chassis with that amount of torque, definitely the most challenging car out of the pack. Don't jump into this expecting it to drive like this car used to. It does not. In fact, I would wager that this probably feels more like the real thing must have felt. And it actually handles and performs in a way that reminds me quite a lot of like a racing Shelby Cobra, except like a 427 Cobra rather than a 289, say Daytona for example, which I personally love. This is a big beast. Sure, it's a sports car technically, but it may as well be a muscle car because it's a muscle kind of vibe through and through. It is a beast of a car with a big, very powerful, very torquey engine. It's lightweight, and even with the ballast, it's still very much front biased on weight. So with no downforce, even with racing tyres, it can break loose. My recommendation is be really smooth. Treat this car as you would if you were sat in a real 600 horsepower C2 Corvette. And of course, don't get me wrong, it is tremendously quick. So for classic events, it could be a really nice nostalgia hit. So I hope you have a ton of fun with it. Of course, stick around on the rest of the week for the other special projects builds to come. Check out the ones which I've already done now that we're about halfway through. And of course, I'll see you next time for more. But for now, as always, thanks for watching.